The growth of the internet, the increased use of cell phones, improved trading routes, the world is becoming more and more connected. Is that a good thing? We're getting into globalization today. To really understand globalization, think about historically where we are at. After World War II and the whole devastating impacts of all that World War II brought, the world really got together and decided that there was going to be some sort of collective political order, but as well there's going to be some sort of collective economic order. And think of all the technologies that have grown since then. They've made it much easier for us to talk, travel, and trade with other nations across the globe. And many see that as a good thing, but there are also some downsides to it as well. Let's briefly go back to your knowledge about American history, and let's look at the 1950s. In the 1950s, there really was an economic boom. Most people, if you are white and a man, were doing pretty well. This is really where the birth of this idea of the modern American dream comes from, the idea of having a man and a woman and 2 kids and a dog and a new car and a new house in the suburbs. But also at this time, most labor and most production is taking place in America. So anybody who lived in America who was buying a car that was made in America. Anybody who was buying a radio was buying a radio that was made in America. However, with the advent of all of this new technology, think about airplanes, think about boats, think about the internet, it allows us to go and look across the globe for different resources, or if you're a company owner, you can look for different labor across the entire world. So why does this matter to all of us? Well, this Revis shirt that I'm wearing that has all of your names on the back, if you take a look at the tag, it actually was made in Honduras. And you might ask why that is. And you have to think about, well, why did you only pay $15 for this shirt? Globalization helps regular consumers like you and me because businesses can go to other parts of the country where there are cheaper materials or cheaper labor, and then they can sell products at cheaper rates. So if you noticed, a lot of clothes or toys or really any products, very few of them are made in America because they're usually more expensive if they're made in America. That's why a lot of things you'll see will say made in China, made in Taiwan, made in Bangladesh, and even made in Honduras. So that's essentially what globalization is. It's this increasing interconnectedness between all countries and all markets across the entire world. To look more closely at specific pros and cons of globalization, I'm going to insert a crash course video that I think does a good job of explaining how globalization can both be beneficial to consumers and producers and some problems that exist with it as well. Once you are finished with that video, then there's a very short assignment on Schoology where you're just going to list pros and cons of globalization. So really I'm just asking you to summarize this whole video in one package. I'm asking you to do 4 pros and 4 cons. You can always do more, of course, but I think you can get at least 4.
Let's go to the thought bubble. World trade has been growing since the end of World War II. Free trade agreements and technological advances in transportation and communication mean goods and services move around the world more easily than ever. And we're talking everything from shoes and bananas to innovations and ideas. Take mobile phones. Mobile phones are pretty much good for everything, including reducing poverty. According to economist Jeffrey Sachs, mobile phones are the single most transformative technology when it comes to the developing world. Phones give people access to banking and payment systems, better access to education and information. In some places, mobile phones help farmers get information and get the best price for the stuff they're producing. Installing cell phone towers is also a lot cheaper than running thousands of kilometers of telephone lines. Economists call this leapfrogging, the idea that countries can skip straight to more efficient and cost-effective technologies that weren't available in the past. International trade has also created new opportunities for people to sell their products and labor in a global marketplace. There are some significant downsides to globalized trade, but the statistician Hans Rosling made this point. The 1 to 2 billion poorest in the world who don't have food for the day suffer from the worst disease, globalization deficiency. The way globalization is occurring could be much better, but the worst thing is not being part of it.
Thanks, Thought Bubble. So globalization is the result of companies trying to outmaneuver their competitors. While you search for the cheapest place to buy shoes, companies search for the cheapest place to make those shoes. They find the cheapest sources of leather, dye, rubber, and of course labor. The end result is that labor-intensive products like shoes are often produced in countries with the lowest wages and the weakest regulations. This process creates winners and losers. The winners include corporations and their stockholders who earn more profit, but also consumers who get products at a cheaper price. The losers are high-wage workers who used to make those shoes. Their jobs moved overseas. But what about the low-wage foreign workers? Are they winning or losing? Well, a lot of workers are thrown into hazardous working conditions, but it's also true that many workers in developing countries are at least making more money. These jobs pay above average wages. People want these jobs. And although the pay would be unacceptable in developed countries, they're often the best alternative. And the multiplier effect means that more money is being spent on local businesses, so these jobs create jobs. According to the economist Paul Krugman, the Bangladeshi apparel industry is going to consist of what we would consider sweatshops, or it won't exist at all. And Bangladesh, in particular, really needs its apparel industry. It's pretty much the only thing keeping its economy afloat.
But not everyone agrees. Opponents of globalization call the outsourcing of jobs exploitation and oppression, a form of economic colonialism that puts profits before people. A few call for protectionist policies like higher tariffs and limitations on outsourcing. But others focus on the foreign workers themselves by demanding they receive higher wages and more protections. The root of many arguments against globalization is that companies don't have to follow the same rules they do in developed countries. Some developing countries have no minimum wage laws. They don't have regulations that provide safe working conditions or protect the environment. And although nearly every country bans child labor, those laws are not always enforced. But in the absence of regulation, it's still possible workers won't be horribly mistreated. First, public awareness is growing, along with pressure from the international community to take steps to protect workers. For example, the U.S. produces an annual publication called the List of Goods Produced by Child Labor or Forced Labor. If a company is buying products from that list, they're likely to get blasted by officials and the media. So awareness is the first step to improvement. The second step comes from those that support globalization. The pro-globalization set argue that as developing economies grow, there are more opportunities for workers, which leads to more competition for labor and higher wages.
Perhaps the strongest argument against globalization is its lack of sustainability. Many experts don't think the planet can sustain a growing global economy. Deforestation, pollution, and climate change aren't going to fix themselves, especially if increases in living standards lead people to demand more consumer goods like cars and meat and smartphones. Globalization has helped millions of people get out of extreme poverty, but the challenge of the future is to lift up the poor while at the same time keeping the planet livable.
One of the best ways to help those in extreme poverty is to enable them to participate in the economy. This applies to developing countries in the global marketplace, but also to individuals at the local level. A perfect example is microcredit. In 2006, a Bangladeshi professor named Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for implementing a simple idea. He gave small loans, on average around $100, to low-income people in rural areas. The borrowers, who were mostly female, often used the money to fund plans that could raise their income. For example, they started small businesses. Microcredit was a success and has since spread to developing countries throughout the world. Private lenders, governments, and nonprofit organizations have jumped on board to loan billions of dollars to the world's most disadvantaged. By itself, microcredit isn't going to solve the problem of extreme poverty, but it supports the idea that enabling people to participate in the economy can make their lives better. Eunice explains. In my experience, poor people are the world's greatest entrepreneurs. Every day they must innovate in order to survive. They remain poor because they do not have the opportunities to turn their creativity into sustainable income. Microcredit, when it works, allows people to improve their lives by participating in the economy on their own terms. But we can't forget, a lot of people who participate in the global economy aren't doing it on their own terms. Many of the people who've emerged from extreme poverty in the last 25 years have jobs, wages, and working conditions that would be unthinkable in the developed world. Economists say that's okay, it's progress, but it's progress that's awfully hard to stomach.